Good evening, everybody. So today's gospel reading raises some very important questions, and it gives us some very important answers. The questions are human questions, and the answers are divine answers. Here are the questions. What must I do to inherit eternal life? And who is my neighbor? There is a third question which I will raise up later, but the answers, the questions raised and the answers given are the topic of my homily today. And by the way, this homily is just a little more dense than my homilies normally are. I took some time to think about it and write some stuff, so please just stay with me. So here's the first question. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, the question was asked by a scholar of the law. Scholars of the law in Jesus' time were not only experts in Mosaic law, but they also interpreted the law for the common folk. Aware of his expertise, because Jesus knew he was a lawyer, he asked him, what is written in the law? And not only that, how do you read it? In other words, how do you interpret it? And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. The scholar's answer was not only correct, but even his creative interpretation won Jesus' praise. Now, interestingly, this answer is also found in the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, but it was given for a different question. The question was, which is the greatest commandment? And different from Luke, in those passages, it was Jesus who gave the answer, as he combined the love of God and the love of neighbor into one commandment. In Luke, that we've read today, the same answer is given to the question, what should I do to inherit eternal life? Now, whether it is Jesus' answer in Matthew and Mark or the lawyer's answer in Luke, Mosaic law does not have the two commandments clubbed together. The first part is what is popularly known as the Shema. Shema Israel. Every Jewish home at the entrance to the door would have this written so that people do not forget this law. And it said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." And the Shema is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 to 6. The second part is you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And it is found in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. So these two laws are found in two separate places. Now the lawyer collapses two commandments into one. On the one hand, the creativity of the lawyer is to be admired, but the more important thing for us as Christians is that Jesus approving his answer tells us how the gospel of Jesus Christ goes beyond Mosaic law. So the answer to the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life, is love of God and love of neighbor. And this raises the question, who is my neighbor? Mosaic law did not have a passage that defined a neighbor, but it was clear that the neighbor was more than the one who lived next door. In a broad sense, it included all the Israelites. The non-Israelites were called aliens, and the law said in regards to them, when an alien resides with you in your land, do not mistreat such a one. You shall treat the alien who resides with you no differently than the natives born among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you too were once aliens in the land of Egypt. So the neighbors are Israelites, but the same commandment that was said about neighbors is also applicable to the aliens. Now, Jesus' answer to the question, who is my neighbor, was the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now here, Jesus went beyond the expertise of the scholar of the law. You see, Jesus, I've called Jesus one of the most brilliant minds that walked on the face of the earth. Listen, here was a scholar of the law who knew how to interpret the law, talking to Jesus. And Jesus goes beyond the expertise of the lawyer. The fact that Jesus makes a Samaritan the hero of the story, while showing the Jewish religious leaders in negative light, was not some faux pas. Jesus was defining what the law did not define. Jesus was giving a definition of a neighbor that even included the enemy. Now, why did I bring up the word enemy here? Because the Jews viewed the Samaritans as a mongrel race due to the intermingling of Israelites with foreign population after the Assyrian conquest in 722 BC. And the history is very simple. After Solomon, the kingdom was divided into two, the kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom was Israel, with Samaria as its capital, hence the Samaritans. And then you have on the south the kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as the capital. In 722, the Assyrians pretty much devastated the northern kingdom. And what happens is that there is mixed marriages. Races gets mingled between the Israelites and the Assyrians. So this perception of impurity is what fuels the animosity and the enmity. But the geography is also important. The geographical proximity of Samaria, situated between Galilee and Judea, often forced Jews to travel through Samaritan territory. However, the deep-seated hatred led many Jews to take longer alternative routes to avoid contact with the Samaritans. In essence, the Samaritans were seen by the Jews as a corrupted offshoot of their religion, and this gave rise to centuries of mutual hostility and separation. Now, Jesus used a Samaritan as the hero of his parable to challenge the prevailing social and religious prejudices of the time. In the parable, the priest and the Levite, religious leaders who should have known better, both avoided helping the injured man. Now, this would have been shocking to Jesus' audience because priests and Levites were held in high regard by them, and the enemy, the Samaritan, is treated like a mongrel. Jesus highlighted the true example of neighborly love. Jesus highlighted that compassion and mercy should extend to all, regardless of their background and social standing. So the parable of the Good Samaritan then answers the question, who is my neighbor? By demonstrating that a neighbor is anyone in need regardless of their background. Jesus emphasizes that true love and compassion are not limited by social, national, or religious boundaries. So I said there was a third question. And the third question, besides what should I do to inherit eternal life and who is my neighbor, is the question that is not raised by the lawyer, but this time the question is raised by Jesus. Jesus asked the lawyer, which of these three, priest, Levite, or Samaritan, in your opinion, was a neighbor to the robber's victim? When the lawyer said, the one who treated him with mercy, Jesus said, go and do likewise. So I would like to offer some practical implications for today. Folks, first of all, Catholic theology sees Christ himself as the Good Samaritan who came to heal and save those who are bruised and wounded. So really, the victims or the victim is humanity. Now, humanity treated the divine Good Samaritan like an enemy. We are not going to forget that humanity, the victim of sin, crucified Jesus, the Good Samaritan, who came to save us. But despite this, the Samaritan, Good Samaritan, the divine Good Samaritan, picks us up, bandages our wounds, and giving his own life, sees us safe into eternal life. We are the victims who have been saved by the divine Samaritan. Secondly, eternal life is not inherited by merely loving God with all our heart, being, strength, and mind. The love of neighbor, placed along the love of God, tells us that love of neighbor is equally necessary to inherit eternal life. Jesus said to the lawyer, do this and you will live. In other words, ignoring neighbors in need, like the priest or the Levite, jeopardizes our eternal salvation. Thirdly, after narrating the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus encouraged the lawyer to go and do likewise. What does go and do likewise mean? It means that we act like Jesus, the Good Samaritan. It means that each of us acts like the Samaritan who extended mercy and compassion to all, even those who might consider us enemies. We are surrounded by victims of violence, of oppression, of exploitation in our very neighborhoods, in our nation, and the world. Our God and our faith call for mercy and compassion in the words, go and do likewise. In this context, I want to draw attention to Catholic Church's teaching on this very contentious issue these days, the issue of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. The Church's doctrine is based both on the Old and the New Testament that I've just laid out before you. The Catholic Church teaches that nations have the right to regulate their borders and manage immigration, to manage immigration flows for the common good. At the same time, the Church emphasizes the inherent dignity of every human person, including migrants and refugees, and calls for a welcoming and just approach to migration. It recognizes the right to migrate, especially when driven by necessity, and calls for nations to offer hospitality and protection to those who seek refuge. More prosperous nations have a responsibility to welcome those seeking refuge and a better life, especially those fleeing persecution or poverty. As Catholics, that's you and I, inspired by the life and the example of Jesus, we have a moral obligation to recognize outsiders as our neighbors and to treat them with dignity, with mercy, and with compassion. For to inherit eternal life, Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." People of God said,